Hello, I'm Joseph the Moral Philosopher. Today we're going to talk about a problem in this country. No, we've got lots of problems, but in particular, I'm going to talk about the problem of democracy, if you want to call it that. I think that's a good way to look at it. Well, let's just get into it. We're going to talk about fairness and unfairness as our two main moral vice and virtue. Okay, so let me explain those. Fairness is going to be the things that I work for, that I get benefit from those things. So if I make something, I get to sell it. I either have that thing or I sell it and I get the value of that thing. Okay? If I take something that somebody else made and do not give them something that they value equally as much, then that is going to be unfair. Okay. With that understood, how does that apply to the American system? Well, taxes. Taxation is theft, as the libertarians like to say. Not exactly, it's more like coercion. Eventually it'll be theft if you don't comply, right? They're going to threaten you, say, we're going to put a lien on your house, that's theft. They're going to say, we're going to put you in jail if you don't pay us, that's coercion, right? If you don't do this, there will be consequences. Right, so why is this unfair? Why is this fair or unfair? Well, the issue there is equal representation, okay? We don't have this in most places, okay? And this is a failing of our country, okay? And this is, in my opinion, is one of the main reasons our country is so chaotic right now. And it's not just our country, it's other places, right? This is a failing in democracy, okay? What is democracy? Well, let's just say voting, right? Everybody gets a vote. Everybody, as an individual, gets an equal say. What does that mean? That means if 51% of the people vote to take your rights away, then they will do that. Now, in theory, we live in a republic where rights are supposed to be protected. That way, the majority, it's never a tyranny of the majority. But this, in practice, is not actually how the country's working. I live in Illinois. Illinois is a very good example of how this is not functioning. We can use Minnesota, we can use California, we can go the opposite direction, use a state like Tennessee, or a red state with blue cities, or well, that's basically how it's going to be. It's just where that population is, right? So in Illinois, Chicago rules the entire state, okay? This is a huge problem if you are not Chicago-minded, right? If you don't agree with what the Chicago, which are progressive Democrats, if you don't really agree with what they're doing, well, too bad. You don't have a say. You have representatives, right? You voted for them, they go, they represent you, but they're outvoted because of the way the system works. It is designed so that whoever has the most population gets to tell the other side what to do. Now, there's a problem here. The problem is that the needs in a city and the needs in a rural part of the state are not the same. Some of them are, some of them are not. Right? We still want the same freedoms, but not really. How about the freedom to protest? How many people in rural Illinois do you see out protesting? Not very many. How many people in, say, a blue city do you see protesting? A whole lot more. Well, okay, what about the gun rights? Well, the rural Illinoisans, they tend to like their guns quite a bit, as most rural areas do. What about the city? Well, there are people there who like their guns, but as far as the government there, they don't really. A good example is Illinois enacted a bunch of gun laws that basically the rest of the sheriffs, red sheriffs in the rest of the state said, yeah, we're not going to enforce any of that because, well, we don't agree with it, and our representatives said, hey, we're not going to do that, but it doesn't matter because it's tyranny of the majority. Chicago has the population, they tell everybody else what to do. Now, where's our unfairness? Well, that comes to unfairness in our representation, but that's not what I mean by unfairness. So fairness is, I work for something, I get that. I don't work for that, I have no right to have that, okay? Well, in a system like this, then whoever has the population can just take what they want, as long as nobody puts up a fight about that, right? This is taxation, okay? So in Illinois, we have money going to things that most rural conservatives are not going to like, okay? Could be Planned Parenthood is a big thing, right? And it's not going to apply everywhere, right? but there is going to be a stronger leaning against that in the red part of the state versus the blue part of the state. Okay? So, in general, our problem here is that, and not just Illinois, but everywhere in the United States, that is going to be like this, right? Whoever has the majority gets to rule the minority. Not the way this is intended to work is the majority idea wins. What does that mean? Well, the idea is that let's say our founders just thought, and I don't know this for sure, this is just how the system appears to be. The founders would say, hey, everybody is going to think rationally, the better ideas will win, and and most people are going to be rational, therefore the more rational idea wins. Okay, well, that's not how it actually works, because what happens is it's not about what's rational and what's not rational, because again, something that seems rational in an urban environment might be irrational if you don't live in that environment. Okay, so we have a system basically where generally the cities rule. Now, in the olden days, that population moved more, right? But as we become more, we're not even industrialized, right? Because we've had the Industrial Revolution a long time ago, right? It's more about the way economics have changed, right? You have one farmer now who farms way more land than they ever would have, 100 years ago. Way more. And that's one farmer able to do that with technology. But so then you have people going to the cities for jobs, and the people in the cities have different needs, and now they're telling the area that used to would have had more farmers, now they don't have the population. So basically, my point here is that the population dynamics are different now because of technological changes than they would have been when some of these laws would have been put into place and some of these ideas would have been codified in the way this country works. We got a big problem because it's not working out that way, right? And so what has this led to? This has led to bipolarization. You have basically a left faction, a right faction, Democrat, Republican, blue, red. Just because you can be in the left faction without being politically a Democrat, because the Democrat could be Democrat socialist, actual communist, somebody like Antifa, somebody like I'm trying to think of another person that be in that faction, and then and probably some of your more centrist people maybe, and then on the right side you have Republicans, but you're also going to have some libertarians, but libertarians tend to be both sides. You're going to have your Christian conservatives, then you're going to have your more, let's say, you would have more secular people on the right, and they're going to be leaning more centers. Typically, what's going to happen. My point is, it's not just one political party versus the other. It's really a cultural difference, and that is predominantly based on rural and urban. And this is historical. Has kind of always been a problem in places rural versus urban. Okay, so what do we do about it? I don't really. I've got some suggestions, right? But my point in this video, because we talk about moral philosophy, the idea is that it is immoral for even if you're in the majority, to impose onto other people your ideas. This is the vice of hubris. This is the idea that we know what is best for you people, even though you can speak, but you don't have the voting numbers because we have the population. And in the way the system works, if you have the population, doesn't matter if your idea is good or bad, you get to do what you want. So this is a failing in our system. It is unfair when one side is voting to take taxes from one group of people and put them on things that they don't want. So this could be a whole different video about taxation in general, but a lot of it does come down to that, because it is going to be, let's say, for example, if you oppose immigration enforcement, well, your money you pay to the federal government is going to that enforcement anyways. if you are in Illinois and, well, say any blue state, but you're in a red part of the state, and you don't want your money going towards like Planned Parenthood or something like that, too bad. They're going to take your money and do that with it anyways. This is a system where you are building conflict because because you're forcibly taking from somebody else something that they earned and using it for something they don't want. So not only are you stealing it from them, but you're also not just stealing it, you're using it particularly for things that they oppose. So this is going to lead to conflict, all right? It is leading to conflict, right? Okay, how could a system like this be fixed? Well, it needs to have fair representation. Ideally, what you would do is you would just design a system so that there is no one group telling a different group what to do. That would solve a lot of the problem, right? So this would be something like maybe a little bit like minarchism or something. The idea is that the smallest area has the most say in what happens, and then it goes up from there. So what would I advise? I would advise smaller states. The urban area of, let's say, Chicago would be a state on its own, and the red area, maybe 3 different states, right? And then you're like, well, that gives the federal government all those extra votes. Maybe, but I think you kind of redesign that too. I think you need bottom-up, complete redesign where the federal government the country needs to be just reworked to fit these modern problems. And maybe they're not completely modern. Maybe there's other examples of this, but like I said, I think the technological advancements are condensing more people in the cities than there would have been before. The immigration issues are also doing that, so you're putting more people in there and giving them more voting power. So this is another problem, and I kind of talked about this in one of my immigration videos, where you're using immigrants to bolster the population. Basically, if cities are blue and then you import people from other countries and put them in only the blue areas, and the blue area gets more political power, and then basically you have domination from one political faction nationwide. That is what's happening in this country now, and hopefully you have the other side saying, no, we're not going to do that, right? Because it's tyranny is what that turns into. Even tyranny of the majority. So even if it's democratic, and you say, well, we voted for this, well, if that's only 51% of the population, then that's a problem, right? You're going to get conflict, because 49% of the population are certainly strong enough to tell 51% we're not going to do that. Now, when it's like 70, 80% on one issue, then we don't have these problems as much. But our system is not doing that now, right? That in some states, I'm sure that is more of a thing, where you're in a state and say you're vastly outnumbered by the other political faction. Well, I mean, you could always leave, but the odds are that, well, a lot of people have, but the odds are if you're staying, it could be because you don't have a choice. You can't leave. Financial, jobs, could be a bunch of different reasons why you wouldn't. But I would say people shouldn't have to leave. People should, as long as if you're like in a city and 90%, if you're in the city and you're conservative and 90% of the population are not going to be conservatives in a city, typically, maybe not 90%, but it's going to be an overwhelming majority, then you say, hey, you know what, I shouldn't live here. I should go somewhere else. That's smart, right? Because you can't, I talked about this in one of the immigration videos. I did one about immigration from the receiving end, one on if you're leaving to another place, that included interstate travel and things like this. Okay, so what's my main ramblings about here? The morality of the system. Well, it is immoral to impose your will on other people. To think that you know better, that is hubris. The system is designed for one faction to have a majority, and impose their will over the other. It is a flaw in the system and is creating the conflicts we have. How do we stop that conflict? We need to separate. And I know everybody's like, oh, well, then you'll fight over resources. You'll make equal trade, all right? Chicago makes things. They have an industry, right? They don't have food, right? I guess maybe they're processing plants, but I don't even know about that. I'm sure they probably do more like the outskirts, right? In the city itself, they don't. Right, so there's trade. The people who make the food live in the rural part, and the people who do all the business type things, right, are going to live in the cities, right? The way we communicate is online. The way generally factories are going to be in cities, bigger cities, right? Because you have population there. To be fair, if we look back at the Industrial Revolution, you say, hey, I need a bunch of people to work at this factory. You have two choices. You either build your factory where there's people, or you build a factory and hope more people come there. Both happened, right? So let's say, hey, let's put factories in Chicago, Gary, Indiana, or wherever, right? You put your factories in this close to a city because you have population, so you'll have workers, and then more people who need jobs will move to the cities to fill those jobs, and the city gets more populous. Now, this can go both ways, at least it used to. You'd have people move to the cities and leave the cities. Usually why people leave the cities, because when you get too much population, then crime kind of gets out of control because there's too many people to keep a stable system, essentially. Now, you could do that by making smaller districts, but then any corruption in any of those places, which happens a lot, Chicago, for example, right? You get a lot of corruption, and then, you can get away with things depending on where you live and who you know, and that's no different in smaller towns. But the smaller towns don't control the rest of the state, right? So if you have a corrupt small town, which is probably not uncommon, all right, then you kind of know people, and people know you, and you will get socially ostracized to some extent with that sort of thing, right? And so there will be ramifications. In a city, that's a little bit harder because you got a bigger population. But one of the things in the city is, well, the city controls the whole state. So if you get Chicago, for example, that becomes very corrupt, well, then the entire state becomes corrupt because Chicago basically rules over the whole state. Whereas if you have isolated towns here and there that are corrupt, well, that only affects the people in that town, and you could leave that town, right? Or you could vote and get that changed or whatever. But when that corruption has so much power, then it's really, really difficult to fix that. So what's our main takeaways from this? Well, basically our system is unfair. It takes from some people and does with that money, and this is a taxation issue. Okay, so they take from one person and use that money how they want. If you are in a red county in a blue state, you have no say basically where your tax money goes. Some states, swing states, tend to have more balance. Illinois is not one of those states. Illinois is a blue state where it's a blue city controlling a red state. That's just how it is. It's a broken problem. It does not have longevity. If there is ever, let's say, political issues in this country are not looking good. Let's say there's civil war or something like along those lines. The blue city says, we're on the blue side. And the red counties say, we're on the red side. And now you have a reason to say, well, they was telling us what to do, but now it's more than that, right? Did the red states go along with the blue city? Probably not, right? Probably not. Because if you live in a area where the state dominates you, obviously you would leave and join a different political faction if you could. So there's a lot of problems around this. How do we fix it? Well, I think the main thing is separation between areas, and then equal representation. So you have your red districts, your blue districts, and they each have equal representation because they are interdependent with each other. You can't just separate them and say, well, they get a country and we get a country. That's not how it works, right? The rural areas do need the cities to some extent. And the cities definitely need the rural areas, otherwise they don't get to eat, right? But the farmers who are producing excess, where does that excess go? Where's it going? It's going on port cities, right? You get port cities that are gonna well, I don't know about St. Louis anymore, but you have cities. If you're gonna ship it through the river, if you're gonna export stuff to another country, it's going down a waterway. Where your cities, well, St. Louis is on the Mississippi, right? That's Missouri. You've got Chicago's on the Lake Michigan. Is that Lake Michigan? Yeah, I think so. Right, you have the cities are ports and they are production hubs, right? You take all the resources, you send them to the factories and they make the stuff there, right? So we're interdependent. We need to work together, but we have opposing views because we have different living environments. We have different needs because of that. Now, the same fundamental needs are always going to be the same, but there will be differences. You fix that by changing the system so that one group cannot enforce policy on another group. That's how you fix that. Chicago can't tell Illinois what to do. Illinois outside of Chicago can't tell Chicago what to do, right? I think New Illinois is doing a good job with this. They're a group trying to separate the state, essentially. Well, not exactly. They basically declared independence and said, we're not part of Chicago. Now, I mean, they've declared independence, but nobody's going to recognize them. It doesn't actually represent most of the counties in the state. It represents some of them. Okay, I don't know what the exact number is anymore. It's a good idea. I don't know that it's feasible. I think it's a good idea. I think it avoids conflict in the future by separating, and this is what I'm advocating for. However, I think it's not just Illinois. The entire country has this problem. So, if one state does it, then really somebody needs to set the precedent to say, hey, we can draw new political lines, but when you do that, you also have to ensure that interdependence still functions, right? Otherwise, you get war. You get the people in the city say, we're just going to take what we want. And you're like, well, they never do that. They don't have the guns. Well, they got a lot of guns. They shoot them sideways. And they're not legal guns. But they have population and they have factories. So you can make guns and they have population, right? Even if civil war would not be as one-sided as what people might think. Resistance fighting and stuff is one thing, but when you can have a population, you can put together an army. When you have spread out population and you have weapons, well, you can put together resistance, but it's much harder to organize people who are more separated by space. So, morally, I think the system is unfair. I think you have to solve those problems, otherwise we will have conflict, and we're already getting that, and we'll get more of it. Anytime you have one group telling a different group what they can and can't do, there will be conflict, and at some point the group's just going to say no. And we have that on a nationwide scale. We have that right now. Part of the country says you can't have those immigrants and illegal immigrants, and part of the country says yes, we can. Look, one side dominates the other, or both sides separate. That's the two options. Which is more realistic? Well, probably the domination is more realistic. There probably will be war, and there will probably be domination, or it won't be a war because one side will just completely crush the other side. Is that a good thing? Well, maybe. It depends on your reasoning there. I'm going to talk about justice in another video, and we'll kind of get into a little bit of that. Because I think there's a moral obligation to justice in general, and I don't necessarily think you should let injustice go unanswered. we'll talk about that in another video. So, hey, if you live in a situation like me where you don't have a voice in your state because you're ruled by the opposite faction, tell me about that. Tell me what state you're in and tell me some of the problems. I didn't go into all the details. I only mentioned like one major problem, but I'm sure most of these states have other issues. The core issue is representation. So if you live in one of these states, let me know, because I know that's the case in Illinois. I don't know whether states have this exact same problem. I assume probably a lot of them, if not the majority. So hit the like button, subscribe. I rambled a lot in this video. Usually I try to be a little bit more on topic. I think I'm mostly on topic, but it probably could have been better. Whatever. If you don't like the video, well, then too bad. I don't know. Tell me about that too. I will see you in the next video. I'm Joseph, the Moral Philosopher. And, well, I won't see you in the next video. You'll see me. I won't see you. That's how video works.